615 CE, Palenque, Mexico. King Pakal controlled 2.5 million Maya citizens without a single standing army. He just made them bleed for God. Picture this. You're standing in the humid jungle darkness, watching torchlight flicker across limestone pyramids as a 12-year-old king slowly pierces his own tongue with a 6-inch stingray spine. Blood streams down his jade mask while 50,000 subjects scream in religious ecstasy, desperate to slice their own flesh in cosmic devotion. But here's what no history book tells you. This wasn't religious ritual, this was the world's first mass trauma bonding experiment, more psychologically sophisticated than any modern cult. Imagine the sweet metallic smell of blood mixing with copal incense as mothers help 5-year-old children pierce their earlobes, teaching them that pain equals divine purpose. You can almost hear the obsidian blades cutting flesh, the whimpering disguised as prayer, the sound of an entire civilization being psychologically rewired to worship their own suffering. In the next 25 minutes, you'll discover the 3 psychological techniques Pakal used to turn self-harm into social control, how his temple of inscriptions contains the blueprint for modern corporate manipulation, and why you're participating in the exact same bloodletting rituals every time you sacrifice your mental health for social media likes. Deep beneath Pakal's tomb, archaeologist Alberto Ruz Luelier discovered in 1952 hieroglyphic inscriptions that decode humanity's darkest psychological secret. The most dangerous person in any society isn't the one holding the weapon, it's the one holding the needle, ready to convince you that your pain serves a higher purpose. Here's how a Maya child king cracked the code of human psychology 1,400 years before we had names for trauma bonding, learned helplessness, and cognitive dissonance. 615 CE, the rainforests of Chiapas, Mexico. Picture the moment everything changed. Pakal ascends to power at age 12 in a world where Maya city-states control 15 million people across an area larger than modern Germany. But Pakal faces an impossible equation. How do you control millions when your noble class represents less than 5% of the population? Imagine walking through Palenque's excavated ruins today. You can still see the blood-stained limestone altars where archaeologist Merle Green Robertson documented intricate carvings in 1973, showing systematic psychological manipulation disguised as religious art. The Temple of Inscriptions towers 65 feet above you, containing 617 hieroglyphic symbols that Mexican epigrapher Miguel Angel Astor Aguilar decoded to reveal Pakal's most disturbing secret. Here's what Stanford psychologist Philip Zimbardo discovered that explains Pakal's genius: when you can convince people their suffering has cosmic meaning, when you make them believe their pain literally prevents apocalypse, you don't need armies or police. They'll torture themselves and call it salvation. Picture the Maya world Pakal inherited: constant warfare between Tikal, Calakmul, and dozens of rival kingdoms. Populations facing drought, disease, and starvation, who had every logical reason to rebel against their rulers. Environmental pressure from supporting massive urban centers in tropical rainforest Palenque alone housed 100,000 people in an area that should sustain maybe 10,000. But Pakal discovered something that modern cult researchers like Stephen Hassan are just beginning to understand. Mass psychological control doesn't require force when you can make people addicted to their own trauma. The inscriptions reveal systematic techniques that Harvard psychiatrist Judith Herman identified in 1992 as complex trauma bonding, but Pakal was perfecting these methods in 615 CE. Imagine standing in that torch-lit plaza as Pakal implements his solution. Every Maya citizen from noble to commoner must participate in scheduled bloodletting rituals, not just witness them, but perform them on themselves. You can almost smell the copal smoke carrying blood-soaked bark paper to the gods. Hear the systematic conditioning that rewired an entire civilization's relationship with pain. Scientists have discovered that when someone inflicts pain on themselves while surrounded by social approval, their brain releases endorphins and oxytocin, literally getting high off their own suffering while bonding deeper to the group demanding that suffering. The temple inscriptions describe quotas. Nobles pierce tongues and genitals with obsidian blades every 20 days. Commoners draw blood from earlobes during each Venus cycle. Children as young as 5 learn that their pain feeds the sun, prevents cosmic collapse, keeps their families alive. And here's what makes this truly disturbing. Modern neuroscience proves this system worked exactly as designed. Once someone has hurt themselves for a belief system, their brain will do anything to avoid admitting that pain was meaningless. But what Pakal's psychological laboratory reveals about the true mechanics of control will shatter everything you think you know about power, manipulation, and why you're still participating in bloodletting rituals today. Let me transport you to dawn in Pakal's Palenque, 618 CE. Picture yourself pressed against limestone steps with 50,000 other bodies, the humid air thick with copal incense that makes your eyes water. You can hear conch shell trumpets echoing off pyramid walls, their haunting notes mixing with something that makes your stomach turn, the sweet, metallic smell of fresh blood, and the sound of people quietly sobbing in what they've been conditioned to call religious ecstasy. King Pakal emerges from the temple of inscriptions like a vision from another world. Imagine seeing him for the first time, jade death mask covering his face, quetzal feathers worth a fortune creating a 3-foot crown, obsidian mirrors embedded in his costume catching torchlight like fractured stars. But in his blood-stained hands, he carries something almost mundane, a simple stingray spine, 6 inches long, honed to razor sharpness. What happens next isn't ritual, it's theater designed to hack the human brain. Picture this moment. Pakal raises the spine above his head, and 50,000 voices fall silent instantly. You could hear a feather drop across that massive plaza. Then, with the deliberate ceremony of a master manipulator, he pierces his own tongue. Not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly letting everyone see the blood flow down his chin, across his jade ornaments onto the bark paper held by trembling priests. But here's what University of Pennsylvania anthropologist David Stewart discovered in the hieroglyphic inscriptions that changes everything. This isn't about religious devotion. This is what psychologists call modeling behavior, when people see their ultimate authority figure inflicting pain on himself, and having that pain treated as sacred and powerful. Their brains automatically assume this behavior is necessary for survival and social belonging. Imagine the psychological tsunami that follows. Starting with the nobles closest to the throne, then spreading outward like a virus of voluntary suffering, every person in that plaza begins their own bloodletting. Picture mothers guiding obsidian blades to help their 5-year-old children pierce their earlobes. Elderly priests drawing blood from their arms with ritualistic precision. Warriors slicing their thighs while chanting prayers of cosmic responsibility. You can almost feel the crowd's energy shifting from individual fear to collective euphoria. This is what MIT neuroscientist Earl Miller calls synchronized neural firing, when group participation in painful activities creates shared brain wave patterns that generate feelings of unity, purpose, and belonging that are literally addictive. But here's Pakal's psychological masterstroke that modern advertising executives would kill to understand: The blood isn't just spilled and forgotten. Picture the ceremony's climax. Priests collect every drop on specially prepared bark paper, then set it ablaze, sending spirals of blood smoke rising toward the pyramid peaks. This creates what Harvard psychiatrist Judith Herman identified as a trauma-meaning nexus. The brain permanently associates physical pain with cosmic significance, making suffering feel not just tolerable, but essential for universal survival. Now, imagine you're a Maya commoner experiencing this for the first time. Your god king, the most powerful person in your known universe, is hurting himself and calling it holy. Your neighbors, your family, your community leaders are all participating with religious fervor. The priests are chanting that this blood literally feeds the sun, keeps the rains coming, prevents the stars from falling and the world from ending. What choice does your brain have but to rewire itself around the belief that your pain serves a purpose greater than your individual existence? But Stanford's decoded inscriptions reveal something even more sophisticated. Picture the systematic scheduling. These ceremonies weren't random emotional explosions, they followed precise astronomical calculations. Every 20 days during the Maya calendar cycle, every significant celestial event, every time Venus appeared as the morning star, another opportunity to strengthen the trauma bond between citizens and their cosmic role as willing sacrifices. The temple hieroglyphs describe a hierarchy of suffering that would make modern social media algorithms jealous. Nobles were expected to inflict the most severe wounds: tongues, genitals, major arteries. Commoners had quotas, minimum blood contributions required to keep their communities in divine favor. Children were ranked by their ability to endure pain without crying, with the most stoic 5-year-olds celebrated as spiritually mature. Imagine the psychological prison this created. Every individual felt personally responsible for the well-being of the entire universe. Miss your bloodletting obligation, and you weren't just socially ostracized, you were cosmically responsible for bringing drought, disease, and disaster to everyone you loved. This is what Princeton psychologist Susan Fiske calls distributed guilt, the ultimate form of social control disguised as religious empowerment. And here's where it gets truly dark. The inscriptions show Pakal's priests maintained detailed records of participation, who contributed blood, how much, how enthusiastically they embraced the ritual. Picture stone scribes with obsidian styluses, tracking psychological compliance across the entire population like an ancient surveillance state. People weren't just giving blood to gods. They were surrendering their psychological autonomy to a system that convinced them their suffering was the only barrier between civilization and cosmic chaos. Every drop of blood was a vote of confidence in their own oppression, a willing sacrifice of individual needs to an authority structure that literally fed on their pain. But you're probably thinking this is just ancient history, right? That modern humanity has evolved past such obvious manipulation. Picture yourself scrolling social media right now. Here's what Harvard neuroscientist Dr. Robert Sapolsky's research reveals about what was literally happening inside Maya brains during bloodletting rituals, and why it worked with devastating effectiveness. Picture the neurochemical cascade triggered the moment that stingray spine pierced Pakal's tongue. Physical trauma immediately floods the brain with endorphins, the body's natural opioids that are chemically identical to morphine. But here's the twisted genius. The Maya timing meant people were literally getting high off their own blood, then permanently associating that euphoria with religious devotion and social acceptance. Imagine the moment when pain transforms into pleasure. Stanford pain researcher Dr. Sean Mackey discovered that when physical suffering occurs in socially approved contexts, the brain's reward system activates simultaneously with pain centers. You're not just hurting, you're experiencing neurochemical validation that this hurt is meaningful, necessary, even sacred. Think about modern gym culture for a moment. Picture people paying money to hurt themselves with weights and cardio, then posting about their suffering on social media for validation. No pain, no gain, right? They feel accomplished, part of a community, even addicted to the process. The Maya just weaponized this exact psychological mechanism for political control 1400 years earlier. But Dr. Matthew Lieberman's UCLA research reveals it gets much deeper. When you inflict pain on yourself in a group setting, especially when that group treats your suffering as meaningful and necessary, your brain activates what evolutionary psychologists call costly signaling. Picture the neurological process. You're not just participating in a ritual, you're proving your genetic fitness and group commitment through voluntary sacrifice. The more it hurts, the higher your social status climbs. Pakal's inscriptions reveal he understood this instinctively. Picture the systematic hierarchy. Bloodletting ceremonies weren't just about blood, they created a social ladder where status was directly tied to your willingness to torture yourself for the community. Nobles who inflicted the most dramatic wounds gained the most respect. Commoners who bled enthusiastically moved up in social standing. Children who endured their first piercing without crying were celebrated as spiritually mature. This created what Yale psychologist Dr. Stanley Milgram would later identify as trauma bonding at civilizational scale. Picture how this works in individual relationships. Someone alternates between causing you pain and providing comfort, making you psychologically dependent on them. But Pakal figured out how to scale this manipulation to millions of people simultaneously. The same authority structure demanding your blood also provided meaning, community, cosmic significance, and social identity. Here's the truly insidious neurological trap. Once someone has inflicted significant pain on themselves for a cause, their brain will do literally anything to avoid admitting that suffering was meaningless. Picture this as Dr. Leon Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory in action. The greater your sacrifice, the more valuable the cause must be, because accepting that you hurt yourself for nothing is psychologically unbearable. Modern neuroscience proves this mechanism with terrifying precision. Dr. Dan Ariely's Duke University experiments show that people who undergo intense initiation rituals report higher satisfaction and loyalty to their groups, even when those groups are objectively harmful. Fraternity hazing, military boot camp, gang initiation, cult recruitment, they all use Pakal's principle. Make people hurt themselves for membership, and they'll defend that membership with their lives. But there's another neurological layer that makes the Maya system particularly brilliant. Picture the astronomical timing as Dr. B.F. Skinner's intermittent reinforcement scheduling perfected. The pain wasn't constant, it was predictable but spaced out, which creates the strongest possible psychological conditioning. Like a casino slot machine that pays out just enough to keep you pulling the lever, except the jackpot was cosmic approval and the currency was your own blood. And here's where it connects to your brain right now. Every time you sacrifice your mental health for a job that exploits you, every time you hurt yourself trying to meet impossible social media standards, every time you endure suffering because someone convinced you it's building character, you're experiencing identical neurological manipulation that Pakal used to control the Maya. Picture how corporate culture has perfected this. Unpaid overtime isn't exploitation, it's showing commitment. Grinding yourself to mental exhaustion isn't unhealthy, it's hustle culture. Sacrificing relationships and hobbies for career advancement isn't tragic, it's investing in your future. Your brain releases the same endorphins and oxytocin, creating the same addictive cycle of suffering for social approval. But here's what gives neuroscientist Dr. Antonio Damasio hope in his research on decision-making. This system only works as long as people believe the authority figure actually serves their interests. The moment people start questioning whether their suffering really serves a higher purpose, the neurochemical reward system begins to collapse. And that's exactly what happened to Pakal's empire. But first, let me show you how deep this psychological manipulation actually went, and why understanding these neurological mechanisms might be the key to breaking free from the modern versions rewiring your brain right now. Now here's where Pakal's system reveals its true diabolical genius. Picture walking through the recently excavated chambers beneath the Temple of Inscriptions, where archaeologist Arnoldo González Cruz discovered in 1999 hieroglyphic texts describing systematic identity destruction and reconstruction psychological techniques that would make modern cult leaders like Keith Raniere take detailed notes. Picture this scene. You're a 12-year-old Mayan noble named Akbal, and you've just been selected for advanced religious training. Imagine thinking this is the highest honor your family could receive. But what you don't realize as guards escort you from your parents' compound is that you're about to undergo psychological transformation that will literally rewire your sense of self, turning you into a willing agent of your own people's oppression. The process begins with what Dr. Robert J. Lifton calls environmental control. Picture young nobles being isolated in special temple complexes, where their only human contact is with priests and other initiates. You can almost feel the psychological pressure as your entire reality becomes controlled by the group you're trying to join. This creates what Harvard psychiatrist Dr. Judith Herman identifies as environmental dependency, when your world shrinks to only include the voices validating your suffering. Then, imagine the systematic breaking down of individual identity. The inscriptions describe elaborate ceremonies where initiates had to publicly confess their selfish thoughts, their doubts about bloodletting, their secret desires for personal happiness over cosmic duty. Picture 12-year-old Akbal forced to stand before elder priests, tearfully admitting that he sometimes wishes he could play instead of piercing his flesh for the gods. These weren't spiritual exercises, they were psychological warfare designed to eliminate any sense of self existing outside the group's ideology. But here's the manipulation that makes it devastatingly effective. Picture the moment after they've broken you down completely. Instead of leaving you shattered, they rebuild you as something they claim is greater. You can almost hear the priests chanting, "You're not just a person anymore, Akbal. You're a vessel for divine will, a guardian of cosmic order, a protector ensuring your people's survival." Imagine how this rewires a child's brain. Your individual desires aren't just unimportant, they're literally threats to universal stability. Want to eat without earning it through blood sacrifice. You're risking cosmic chaos. Feel tired and want to rest. You're betraying every Maya who depends on your spiritual strength. The inscriptions reveal that advanced initiates underwent a ceremony called Death of the Small Self. Picture this ritual. Young nobles symbolically died as individuals and were reborn as instruments of divine purpose. They received new names, new identities, new social roles completely dependent on enforcing the bloodletting system on others. And here's where the psychology becomes truly insidious. Once someone survived this process, they became the most effective enforcers because they genuinely believed in it. Picture Akbal, now called Blood Speaker of the Gods, zealously monitoring other children's commitment to self-harm. He's not a cynical oppressor, he's a true believer who sees any challenge to bloodletting as a personal attack on his cosmic identity. This created what Dr. Stanley Milgram would recognize as distributed enforcement. Pakal didn't need massive secret police because every priest, noble, and community leader had been psychologically programmed to police themselves and others. Picture the surveillance network. Question the system. And you weren't just challenging political authority, you were threatening the spiritual identity of everyone around you. The temple inscriptions describe how this played out in daily Maya life. Picture community leaders expected to monitor neighbors' enthusiasm for bloodletting rituals. Parents reporting children who seemed reluctant to participate. Spouses informing on each other for signs of spiritual wavering. You can almost feel the paranoid atmosphere where showing insufficient enthusiasm for self-torture marked you as cosmically dangerous. But imagine the most insidious psychological trap. The system made resistance seem not just dangerous, but literally impossible. The Maya calendar was constructed so every significant event, births, deaths, harvests, wars, natural disasters, could be traced to the community's blood sacrifice success or failure. Picture experiencing drought in your region. The priests don't blame climate patterns, someone must not be bleeding enough for the gods. Disease outbreak in your neighborhood. Clearly local bloodletting quotas aren't being met. Your child dies in infancy. Obviously, you didn't sacrifice adequately during pregnancy. This created what Dr. Martin Seligman calls learned helplessness on civilizational scale. Picture people genuinely believing that any attempt to reduce blood rituals would result in cosmic catastrophe. Even when they could see the system causing immense suffering, they couldn't imagine alternatives that wouldn't be catastrophically worse. Imagine being trapped in a reality where your pain is the only thing preventing universal apocalypse. Where questioning your suffering isn't just rebellious, it's apocalyptically irresponsible. Where every natural disaster, crop failure, or community death gets blamed on insufficient sacrifice rather than natural causes or systemic problems. Picture Pakal's priests developing elaborate theological explanations for contradictory evidence. People bled faithfully but still experienced hardship. They needed to bleed more. Other communities prospered without extensive blood rituals. They were either secretly practicing them or being temporarily blessed before inevitable cosmic punishment. This is identical to the psychological mechanism keeping people trapped in abusive relationships, toxic jobs, and destructive belief systems today. The system creates problems, then convinces you the system is the only solution. Your suffering isn't evidence something's wrong, it's proof you're not suffering enough. You're experiencing identical psychological manipulation right now, and you probably don't even realize it. Every major institution in modern society has adopted refined versions of Pakal's bloodletting psychology. They've just replaced obsidian blades with subtler forms of self-harm that feel like empowerment. Picture modern hustle culture for a moment. You're constantly told that if you're not grinding 80 hours a week, if you're not sacrificing your relationships and mental health for career advancement, if you're not bleeding your life force for corporate success, then you're lazy, uncommitted, destined for failure. Sound familiar? You're literally offering your psychological blood to an authority structure that profits from your pain, convinced the blade is empowerment, and the suffering is personal growth. Social media platforms have perfected Pakal's intermittent reinforcement scheduling with terrifying precision. Picture your daily ritual. You sacrifice your authentic self, carefully curating perfect images that require constant anxiety and maintenance. You hurt yourself trying to meet impossible standards, then get rewarded with likes, follows, social approval, just enough neurochemical hits to keep you coming back for more punishment. The algorithm literally feeds on your psychological suffering like a digital blood god. The modern education system uses identical trauma bonding techniques. Picture students taught that academic suffering builds character, that stress and sleep deprivation prove commitment, that questioning the system means you're not intelligent enough to succeed within it. 12 years of systematic conditioning teaching people their pain serves higher purposes, preparing them for college, career success, becoming productive members of society. Corporate culture has weaponized Pakal's death of the small self ceremony. Picture your workplace identity transformation. You're not an individual with personal needs anymore. You're a team player, a culture fit, a brand ambassador. Your sense of self becomes completely dependent on your willingness to sacrifice for company goals. Question the system, and you're not just challenging policy, you're attacking the professional identity of everyone around you. Even fitness culture operates on bloodletting psychology. Picture the mantras: no pain, no gain. Embrace the suck. Pain is weakness leaving the body. You're taught to associate physical suffering with moral virtue, to see your ability to endure discomfort as proof of character. Rest and recovery aren't healthy necessities, they're signs of weakness, lack of commitment, spiritual failure. And just like in Maya society, modern systems create distributed enforcement. Picture your coworkers pressuring you to work longer hours because your work-life balance makes them question their own choices. Your social media followers policing your content for authenticity while performing their own exhausting self-curation. Your friends and family becoming agents of societal pressure, pushing you to sacrifice more of yourself for external validation. The most terrifying part: when you try to opt out, the system has ready explanations for why you're wrong. Picture the responses: you're not enlightened, you're lazy. You're not prioritizing health, you're uncommitted. You're not free, you're irresponsible to your community, family, future self. But here's what gives me hope. Just like the Maya Empire, these modern psychological control systems have a fatal weakness. Once you see it clearly, you can never unsee it. The question is, are you ready to stop bleeding for gods that don't actually exist? Are you prepared to discover what happens when you reclaim your psychological sovereignty? Here's the fatal flaw in every system of psychological control, from Pakal's bloodletting empire to your modern social media addiction. They all depend on convincing you that your individual well-being matters less than some greater cause. But what if that greater cause is just an elaborate illusion designed to harvest your energy for someone else's benefit? The Maya inscriptions reveal something crucial about how Pakal's system eventually collapsed. Picture the environmental pressures mounting around 800 CE, severe droughts lasting decades, crop failures across the region, resource depletion from supporting massive urban populations in tropical rainforest. Archaeological evidence from Dr. Richardson Gill's paleoclimatology research shows the Maya faced their worst environmental crisis in 2,000 years. But instead of adapting their system, imagine what the priests did. The bloodletting rituals became more frequent and more extreme. Picture people bleeding so much, so often, that they literally didn't have physical or psychological energy remaining to maintain their civilization. Communities were devoting more time to ritual suffering than food production, construction, or innovation. Yet instead of questioning the system, the priests doubled down. Picture their logic: more blood was needed. Greater sacrifices were required. The gods were clearly unsatisfied with current offerings. This created what systems theorists call a death spiral, where the solution to every problem becomes more of the same behavior causing the problems. Sound familiar? Picture modern parallels. When hustle culture burns you out, the answer isn't rest, it's better time management so you can grind more efficiently. When social media makes you anxious and depressed, the solution isn't logging off, it's crafting better content and building stronger personal brands. When corporate culture destroys your relationships, the answer isn't setting boundaries, it's finding better work-life integration strategies. This is the psychological pattern that destroys both individuals and civilizations, mistaking the symptom for the cause, mistaking the poison for the medicine. Picture the Maya convinced their suffering prevented cosmic catastrophe, when their suffering was the cosmic catastrophe. But here's what modern psychology teaches about breaking free from these systems. The first step isn't rebellion, it's recognition. Picture Dr. Stephen Hassan's research on cult recovery. You have to see the manipulation pattern clearly before you can escape it. Most people never escape because they never realize they're trapped. They mistake their suffering for normal, necessary, even virtuous behavior. The second step involves what psychologists call locus of control. Picture how systems like Pakal's work. They convince you that your well-being depends entirely on external factors, the gods, the market, other people's approval, social media metrics, corporate success. But imagine the moment you realize you have internal control over your values, choices, and definition of success. The entire system loses power over you. Here's the secret both Maya elite and modern power structures understand. Picture this psychological truth. Most people would rather suffer predictably than risk the uncertainty of freedom. The bloodletting ritual was psychologically comfortable because it provided clear cause and effect relationships between pain and cosmic order. Remove that certainty, and people face the terrifying possibility that they are responsible for creating their own meaning and happiness. But for those brave enough to break the pattern, the inscriptions reveal something beautiful. Picture the Maya who stopped participating in bloodletting rituals. They didn't experience cosmic punishment, they experienced liberation. Archaeological evidence shows they had more energy for creative work, stronger community relationships, deeper satisfaction with life. The gods didn't abandon them, they discovered the gods had never existed in the first place. This is why understanding Pakal's psychological control system is crucial for modern life. Picture your daily choices. Every moment you face decisions between bleeding for external validation or investing in genuine well-being. Between sacrificing your authentic self for social approval or risking rejection by living according to your own values. The Maya who broke free had to develop what we now call psychological sovereignty. Picture this process, learning to define success, meaning, and purpose from within, rather than accepting definitions imposed by external authorities. Trusting your own experience over social pressure, your own needs over group demands, your own wisdom over institutional ideology. And here's the most powerful discovery. Picture what happens when enough individuals reclaim their psychological sovereignty, the entire control system collapses. Not through violent revolution, but through simple non-participation. The emperor has no clothes, the gods require no blood, and your worth doesn't depend on your willingness to suffer for someone else's benefit. The only question remaining is, what are you ready to stop bleeding for? So there you have it, the ancient Maya blueprint for psychological control that's still running your life today. King Pakal figured out 1400 years ago that the most effective way to control people isn't through force, but by convincing them their suffering serves a higher purpose. Picture your own bloodletting rituals. Every time you sacrifice your well-being for social media likes, grind yourself to mental exhaustion for career success, or hurt yourself trying to meet impossible standards, you're participating in Pakal's system. The only difference is that modern society has convinced you the obsidian blade is empowerment and the blood is personal growth. But here's your moment of choice. Now that you can see the psychological pattern clearly, what are you going to do about it? Keep bleeding for gods that don't actually care about your well-being, or start investing that energy in what genuinely matters to you. Picture the Maya who broke free from Pakal's system. They didn't just survive, they thrived. Archaeological evidence shows they built smaller, more sustainable communities based on mutual support rather than mutual suffering. They created art, raised families, found meaning that didn't require constantly proving their worth through pain. You can do the same. The psychological sovereignty those ancient rebels discovered is still available to you today. If this video helped you recognize the bloodletting rituals in your own life, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what modern, sacred suffering you're ready to question. Subscribe for more hidden history that explains why your world works the way it does, and more importantly, how you can break free from systems designed to harvest your energy. Your Maya ancestors figured out how to escape psychological control. So can you.